Hey everyone, welcome to Judging for the Win. I'm Dave, and this is my daily ruling. I got the idea for today's question from a popular magic comedy channel. Amy, attacks with an Abyssal Persecutor that has Sword of Hearth and Home equipped to it. Nick is at 6 life, and he lets the Abyssal Persecutor through unblocked. Can Amy win the game by exiling the Abyssal Persecutor with the Sword of Hearth and Home's ability? Alright, so the first thing that we want to take a look at here is let's note that the thing that makes you lose the game for having 0 or less life is a state-based action. Now, the game doesn't check state-based actions continuously. Rather, there's specific predetermined times, that being whenever a player is about to get priority, where the game checks to see if any state-based action conditions exist, and if so, then it performs the associated state-based action. So if the game checks for state-based action conditions and it sees that Nick has 0 or less life, then Nick is going to lose the game. Well, normally that's how it would work. However, there's one extra wrinkle, which is that as long as Amy controls Abyssal Persecutor, it's not possible for Nick to lose the game. So that state-based action is actually going to go ahead and do absolutely nothing. So in order to answer this question, let's note that the game does not check for state-based actions in the middle of resolving a spell or ability. And that's important because that's the only time when Amy does not control the Abyssal Persecutor. So immediately before the Sword of Hearth and Home triggered ability is going to resolve, then Amy does control Abyssal Persecutor, so when the game checks for state-based actions then it's going to see that Nick can't lose the game, and he will still be in the game. And then immediately after the trigger has resolved, then Amy is still going to be seen to control the Abyssal Persecutor at the time when the game checks for state-based actions then. The fact that there was a brief period of time in between those two periods where the game did check state-based actions, where Amy did not control the Abyssal Persecutor, does not have any bearing at all on the answer to this question. Because Amy recovered control of the Abyssal Persecutor by the time the next state-based action check happened, then the Abyssal Persecutor's effect was still going to be around when the game tried to make Nick lose at that point. So, in fact, Nick will not lose the game if Amy blinks the Abyssal Persecutor in this manner. So that's kind of a bummer, but let's see if there's maybe another card that works a little bit differently. So let's say that Amy is going to get a Sword of Hearth and Home trigger while she controls a Leonin Arbiter. Would it be possible for her to exile the Leonin Arbiter with that triggered ability from Sword of Hearth and Home, and then get the land without paying the extra 2 mana to be able to search her library? And this one is going to work a little bit differently. Let's notice that the specific time when Amy is going to be instructed to search her library is not going to be either before or after the triggered ability from Sword of Hearth and Home resolves. Rather, it's going to be during the middle of that triggered ability, because of course, this isn't a state-based action that's causing her to search her library, rather it's one of the instructions of that triggered ability. Now, we know that whenever a spell or ability resolves, we're going to follow the instructions in the order that they're written down. And we'll notice that, luckily for Amy, it just so happens to be the case that Sword of Hearth and Home has you exile the creature and then search your library. So that means that when you're instructed to search your library, you don't control Leonin Arbiter at that time. And that means there's nothing saying that you can't search your library unless you pay 2. Also, another really interesting point is that if the Leonin Arbiter leaves the battlefield and then comes back, well, when it's back on the battlefield, it's considered to be a new object with no memory or a relationship to its previous existence. And so that means that if either player would have paid 2 before this happened, then that would not be helping them out at all after the Leonin Arbiter gets returned to the battlefield. Even though it's the same physical card, it's considered by the game to be a new object. And that means that if you paid 2 to ignore the old Leonin Arbiter's ability that says you can't search your library, well, that means that absolutely nothing is going to help you out there, because we have a brand new, completely unrelated Leonin Arbiter that's now saying that you can't search your library. Alright, so that was pretty cool, but there was one more really interesting interaction with Sword of Hearth and Home that I thought up. Let's say that Amy is attacking with Sword of Hearth and Home creature, and this time she has a Zozu the Punisher. Would it be possible for her to exile Zozu the Punisher and then put the land and Zozu back onto the battlefield and not have to take 2 damage because a land entered the battlefield? Alright, so to answer this one, we're going to need to know a little bit about how triggered abilities work. Zozu the Punisher has a triggered ability that says whenever a land enters the battlefield. Now, the way that triggered abilities get checked like this is anytime anything happens in the game has to check to see if what just happened caused any triggered abilities to trigger. And if so, then it'll put those triggered abilities on the stack. So, immediately after the land and Zozu enter the battlefield, the game is going to check to see if what just happened caused any triggered abilities to trigger. Of course, since Zozu entered the battlefield at the exact same time as the land, that means that when the game is checking to see if the thing that just happened caused any triggered abilities to trigger, it will see that right now on the battlefield, there's a triggered ability that says, whenever a land enters the battlefield, 2 damage. And what that means is that Amy is not going to be able to get out of taking 2 from having this land enter the battlefield, despite her best attempts. Also, before I sign off here, I want to make it 100% clear I'm not taking a dig at MTG Remy for having a rules inaccuracy in one of his songs. Actually, I thought that one was really funny, and I encourage everyone who hasn't seen it to take a look in the link in the description. But that's all I have for you today. How did you do? Join me again next time for another daily ruling, but until then, I hope you have a great day.